Hi guys, welcome to the second part of how I color my illustrations. I have the first part to the video linked so you can go check it out so you don't have to watch it in any specific order. But yeah, I hope you enjoy this video, and without further ado, let's begin. This one here I'm going to be doing with cookies. Again, this is like the oldest pack of cookies probably still in existence on the planet that still work. So I'm just going to use normal cookies, felt tip markers. Okay, so getting into the actual colouring, here you can see I'm laying out the colours that I want to use. So I'm going with a very pinkish colour scheme, and then I'm starting here with the mid to lightest pink. And I'm just kind of cross-hatching to get some texture into the drawing. As you probably know by now, I have a thing for textured drawings, and I'm basically just going over it at different angles so that you can see the different shades of line. So this is a more purple color that I'm using to add in the darker bits as well as outline the collar, just to make the outlines clear. And then I'm just kind of adding the darkest areas, so the shadows with the purple. It's also the bluest color, so which would make it appear darker anyway, like cooler. I don't know, things with blue in it make better shadows. So that's why I'm using purple for the shadows, other than the fact that it's just darker than pink. But yeah, it's pretty simple in terms of the technique I'm using. It's basically just cross-hatching. And then after I finish with adding in the detail like this, I'm going to, you'll see it in a little bit, to go over it with a brush. It just has water on it. I wasn't going to do this. I was originally going to leave it just like this with the cross-hatching of the markers, but I decided to go in with water because you can see it here. It's a bit of a weird texture. I don't know why. The markers, like, I don't know, they don't like the watercolor paper or something, so I think I figured that if I went over it with water it would get better, and it did. I like the way that it turned out. So that's pretty much what this is here that you're seeing. It's literally just a brush that's got water on it, and because the markers are water soluble, the color blends. For this one here on the side, I'm going to be using gouache paints. I'm just using these paints. It is Prime Art gouache paints. They're not super great. They were the cheapest gouaches I could find, because I'd never used gouache before and I didn't want to invest in a super super big set, so they just came in a set like these. So any gouache paints will do, expensive, inexpensive. Yeah, so this one here on the side is going to be in gouache. So the thing about gouache paints is they're opaque, but the thing is it doesn't work the same as acrylic paints because they're very hard to get like flat colors. So when you do an opaque, like thick layer of gouache paint, it sometimes dries a little bit like streaky, as you can see the brush strokes that you used. So the way that I get around that is using like small areas that I will color a flat color, because it's much easier to do a flat area if it's smaller than trying to get one big smooth flat color down. So yeah, that's basically like the two different ways that I use gouache. One is thick opaque paint, and then another, which you'll see when I color the skin, is I basically thin the paint out with water and use it much like I would use a watercolor paint, in thinner layers of paint. And I just kind of go back in to the areas that I want to create shadow with more and more paint, because they don't work the same as watercolors. You can't do a wash of color over the top, because it'll reactivate the paint in the layers underneath. So basically what I do is I just go with a very light color, and then I go back over it with a slightly darker color, and then a slightly darker color. It's the same color, it's just one has more water, and then progressively it gets less and less water, so it gets more pigmented. And that's basically how I add layers to gouache, but it's not really, it's mostly just adding more pigment as you go along to make shadow. So yeah, that's pretty much like the, and I've shown both of them here. Like the hair is very opaque, I used very thick gouache, and then for the skin I used stuff that's very watered down, which you can kind of see on my palette. No, but I like gouache overall. It's a pretty manageable medium. If you can use acrylic or watercolor, you'll pretty much be able to use gouache. It just takes a little bit of getting used to in terms of the way it reactivates the color underneath. But I like the medium a lot. Yeah. Then this one here at the bottom is going to be in watercolor, and I'm just using these watercolors here. This is a set that's super old. I don't think you can get it anymore. It was my mom's. I just stole it from her. And then these are just Schmincke watercolor pans that you can pretty much get anywhere. So these are the watercolors that I'm going to be using, but again, any watercolors will do if you want to color your illustrations using watercolor. Okay, so this one here at the bottom probably took the most time out of all of the illustrations that I did. And this is just because you have to wait until watercolor's completely dry before you put on the next layer if you don't want the colors to move around. So basically I don't know if it's what you're supposed to do, because I'm not the I only just recently started using watercolors, but the way that I use them is I go in with very light colors initially, and then what I do is I gradually make them darker, and then you go over with like areas and washes of paint on top of what you already have, and then gradually the colors will get darker and get more to where you want them to be. So the thing with watercolor versus gouache is gouache reactivates the layers underneath, whereas watercolor doesn't, which is why you can use washes of color over the whole thing, which I think you've seen me do here, but I do it. Like, yeah, I'm doing it here. I'm basically just using the blue color in the areas that I want shadow, and I just smear it, I don't know, paint it over the whole illustration. And I don't have to worry about the colors in the previous layer moving. They just get darker where I add the color. And the reason it took so much time is you have to wait for it to dry. So with gouache, you can kind of go in if it's still a little bit wet, but also gouache dries relatively quickly. Whereas watercolors, it has to be bone dry if you don't want the colors underneath it to move. And then after I painted it, I basically just went in with a pencil to give like an outline, but I didn't want to outline it with a pen because it's a little bit harsh for watercolor, or at least the way that I use watercolor. So I basically just go in with pencils, go over some of the pencil lines, add some more interesting line work, some shadows that I like on the nose here. I added some extra shadow because I didn't get it dark enough with the paint, and I do it a little bit in the hair like I'm doing here, where I just kind of color in. There we go. See, there I did it. And yeah, I like pencil. It's like a more subtle way to add line work, but you give the work more definition than if it was just watercolor. So yeah, thank you so much for watching my video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you haven't seen the first part of the video, I'm going to link it now, so you can go check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, have a great week, and I will see you guys next Sunday.